if you look at the great scholars of Islam, you will see that they were all following this path of akhirah. And he uses Imam Shafi as his great exemplar. And then he goes on, the next section is about the student and the teacher. And he gives the duties that are necessary for a student. And then he gives the duties that are necessary for a teacher. And he says the student has to be patient with his teacher. He has to listen to him. He can't want to show off. And again, remember, he's speaking from his experience because he was the big show-off. And he admits that. So he's speaking from experience. And then he says that the teacher has to have compassion for the student. He has to treat him like a child. A father would treat a child out of love. He wants to see him grow. And then finally he talks about in the sixth section, and then he ends with the seventh, which is about the intellect. He talks about the evils of knowledge and how you distinguish between the ulama of the akhirah and the ulama of this life. And this for me is the most painful one because it's hard to read it, because he's really, when he shows you what the scholars of the afterlife are like, and he's saying, okay, here's all the descriptions. Does this match? Do you see yourself in here? He's asking the reader, do you see yourself in here? He said, look, these people are people that prefer the next life over this life. They're not people of luxury. They're not laziness. He talks a lot about the indolence of scholars. He said, how do these scholars sit at home, eating their food, basking in all this luxury, and there's people that don't know how to read the Fatiha in their neighborhood. There's people that are ignorant all around them. How do they justify their existence? How do they do that? And so he really painfully looks at these teachers, and he gives you very powerful ma'ayir, standards to judge teachers. He talks about modesty. He said that these teachers today will say that humility is dhul, it's humiliation, and that kibr is izzah, it's dignity. Arrogance is dignity. So he said they'll change the words to give a different meaning, and just to justify their own arrogance and the conceit that he talks about. And he says a characteristic of these true learned people is that they walk their talk. He said you will see them implementing what they practice. One of the great sheikhs here, Sheikh Mahmoud Effendi, who hopefully we might meet him, but he, when he does dhikr, he never lets the subha go below his heart. And he said to his students, if you ever see me leave one sunnah, leave me. And he's not exaggerating. That's why he reached the maqam that he reached, his station. People recognize it. But this is what he's saying, is that these are their qualities. And then he talks about that also, that they seek useful things and they avoid things that are inconsequential. They don't really lead to anything of any value or benefit to them. And once the Prophet ﷺ saw some people around a man, and they asked him, and he said, oh, he's an expert on and he said, on what? And he said, ash-shi'r wal-ansab, poetry and lineage. And he said, that's something, the knowledge of which doesn't benefit, and the ignorance of which doesn't harm. Right? So to be an expert on that. But there's also ta'allamul ansab ma tasiru bihi arhamukum. Learn enough of the ansab that you keep your bloodship ties. And then poetry, in the fish-shi'ri la hikmah, there's wisdom in poetry. But to spend your whole life in those things, you've wasted your precious life. And then he talks also about that they're not disposed to indulgence in food and drink and luxury and dress and furniture and housing, but they prefer economy in these things, following the Salaf as-Salih. But then he goes on to mention a story, and this is his balance. He mentions a story of Imam Malik, where Yahya bin Yazid wrote him a letter, and he said, I heard you eat good food, and you wear beautiful clothes, and you ride beautiful horses. And Imam Malik wrote back to him and said, and then the man told him, it's better if you left all these things and practiced zuhud, detachment. Imam Malik wrote him a letter and said, I do indeed eat good food, and I wear good clothes, and I do. And he said, and I know that leaving those things is better, but they're permissible, and I'm not doing anything haram. And he said, and the door that God has opened to me is the door of knowledge. For other people, he opened the door of zuhud. And for other people, he opened the door of prayer and fasting and things. So Imam Malik said, I'm content with the door that God opened for me. So he explains that this is not extremism. It's not becoming like the Darawish who give up everything. He's not saying that. He's talking about balance, but he's saying that in the end, your heart has to be detached from these things. And then another characteristic is that he keeps away from rulers. And there's a hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ said that the best of rulers are at the doors of the ulama and the worst of ulama are at the doors of rulers. Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya told me, he said that al-awwal mutlaq wal-akhiru muqayyad. That the first part of that statement is absolute. The best rulers are at the doors of the scholars. But the second one is it's restricted by the intention of the scholar. If they go to the ruler to get money from them or to get something, then it's blameworthy. But if they go with it with a pure intention to benefit or to make shafa'ah or to do something, then it's different. And Imam al-Ghazali, in the end of his life, he made an oath at Al-Khalil in Jerusalem, near Jerusalem. He made an oath that he would never enter a ruler's domain again. And at the end of his life, he was called to the court, and he sent a beautiful letter saying that he'd made this oath, and in the end they were coming to him. So before he had been seeking them, in the end they were seeking him. And that was the way of the Salaf, is that the rulers sought them out, not the other way around. And so he goes on and explains, and then that he's also not impatient to give his opinion, that a true scholar is not quick to tell you what he knows, but he deliberates. I was once with Sheikh Abdullah, with the Siddiq, a great scholar from Mauritania, as a mufti in the Emirates, really, truly great scholar. And I remember this man from one of the Arab countries asked him a question, and we were in the Darul Iftah. And Sheikh Abdullah said, come tomorrow and I'll give you the answer. And this man turned to me and he said, Da ya'araf haga? Does he know anything? And then he just left because he had been so accustomed to ulama just giving their opinion right off the bat. Whereas Sheikh Abdullah was somebody who would always deliberate and think because he felt the weight of fatwa. The Malikis call it a nazila fatwa. It's called a tribulation. And Imam Malik, if he was asked a question, you say, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. He'd use the word for musibah. If somebody asked him a question in the religion, because it was such a weighty thing, سَنُلْقِي عَلَيْكَ قَوْلًا ثَقِيلًا. One time he asked, Imam Malik was asked a question, and he said, I don't know. And he said, هذا سؤال خفيف. It's a light question. He said, لَيْسَ فِي دِينِ اللَّهِ خَفِيف. There's nothing light in Allah's religion. سَنُلْقِي عَلَيْكَ قَوْلًا ثَقِيلًا. We're thrusting on you a weighty word. And this was the feeling, so that these ulama had. And then finally, he says that they seek muraqabah and internal transformation more than they seek the outward. So they're more concerned about their internal states than they are about the outward. And then he talks about the state of yaqeen and developing yaqeen. And he gives a different explanation of the two meanings of yaqeen, which is one is from the dhawq and the other is an intellectual type of certainty that comes. One is experiential. And then finally, in the 7th section, this is how he ends this book. He ends it with a description of the intellect, its noble nature, its definition, and its divisions. And he talks about the fact that Allah uses in the Quran light as a metaphor. That light is the metaphor for knowledge, and darkness is the metaphor for ignorance. And he gives an example. He tells us that the intellect is the light that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us to guide us in the world. And he uses the example of the Ayatul Nur, the light verse. And then he says, in conclusion, he gives 4 meanings for the intellect. And the first is his quality which distinguishes man from others. So it's his ability to grasp abstracts. For instance, one of the secrets of our religion is it's centered around facing the Kaaba, which is a complete abstraction because there's no cubes in the world. So our symbolic house that we turn to 5 times a day is an abstraction because what we worship is something that's beyond the senses. It's not something we can see in the world. It's something that we need to understand through. And then second, it's the knowledge of knowing the things that are possible and impossible, necessary and unnecessary. And the third, it's empirical knowledge. It's those things like science that we use, the intellect. And finally, in the fourth, he said it's the power to distinguish ends. And this is really, he said, this is the most important thing. And when you can do this, when you understand what's harmful by thinking it through rationally, the aql takes its function, which is ya'qiluka. It will prevent you from doing harm. So he basically ends by saying the foundation of knowledge is the intellect. But he's not using the intellect in the sense that it's understood by modern man as this rational component. And he actually says the reason that the Sufis will censure the intellect is because they're talking about the intellect that people think is the intellect of mathematics and arithmetic and the obsession over these things. He's saying, no, the intellect is something that is capable of knowing its Lord. It's a light inside the human heart, and that's at the root of that book. And that's why, in the end, the book of knowledge is the foundation of the Ihya, and he will return to it again and again, because the Ihya is a book of reviving ulum. And so he begins it with a definition of what are the ulum and why should they be sought, and with what are they sought, with the intellect, and what is the intellect. And this is part of the profound architecture of his great book, his opus, the Ihya Ulum ad-Din. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين.